Nothing was stolen, nothing was hacked, nothing triggered an alarm, and that is exactly why almost no one noticed what was happening. For more than 20 years, one of the most powerful transfers of advantage in modern history unfolded quietly, legally, and in full compliance with the rules. It did not involve soldiers, spies, or sanctions. It did not require secret meetings or classified documents. It happened inside classrooms, inside laboratories, inside research meetings that looked completely ordinary. The United States did not lose power overnight. It shared it piece by piece, believing that sharing was the source of its strength. This is not a story about betrayal. It is a story about design. After World War II, the United States made a decision that reshaped the world. It would not hoard knowledge the way empires once hoarded gold. Instead, it would turn knowledge into a renewable resource, something that multiplied when distributed. Universities became the center of this strategy. Federal money flowed into science and engineering. Researchers were encouraged to publish openly. Collaboration was rewarded. Failure was tolerated, sometimes even celebrated. This system produced extraordinary results. Breakthroughs came faster. Industries formed around ideas. Talent from across the globe flowed toward American campuses. And that flow was not accidental. The message was subtle but clear. If you wanted to learn how the future was built, you came to the United States. By the 1980s and 1990s, this model looked unbeatable. American universities dominated global rankings. Their graduates filled leadership positions in technology, finance, medicine, and defense. Their research shaped entire industries before competitors could react. Openness was not a weakness, it was a flex. International students were welcomed not despite being foreign, but because they were foreign. Diversity was proof of influence. Every brilliant mind trained in the US system was seen as an extension of American soft power, and for decades that assumption held. Then China changed the equation. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Chinese policymakers reached a conclusion that would guide everything that followed. They did not need to outspend the United States immediately. They did not need to surpass it overnight. They needed to understand it. So instead of building isolated research ecosystems, China leaned into integration. Chinese students were encouraged to study abroad, not selectively, but at scale. Science, engineering, computer science, materials, biology, the fields that shaped the next generation of power. This movement was legal. It was encouraged. It was celebrated. American universities competed to attract these students. Tuition revenue mattered, research output mattered, global reputation mattered. Inside laboratories, collaboration felt natural. A graduate student was a graduate student. A postdoc was a postdoc. Productivity mattered more than passports. And slowly, something began to change. Chinese students did not just learn content, they learned process. They learned how research questions were framed, how uncertainty was handled, how risk was calculated, how long-term projects were broken into fundable pieces. They learned how to fail efficiently. This mattered more than any single discovery, because once you understand how failure is managed, you shorten the path to success. This knowledge was never classified. It was never written down as a secret. It could not be exported or restricted. It lived in conversations, in lab meetings, in offhand comments after experiments failed, and it traveled home with the people who absorbed it. At first, this raised no concerns. Education had always worked this way. The assumption was that students trained in the US would carry American values with them, that openness would create alignment, that shared methods would create shared interests. But history does not reward assumptions. By the mid-2000s, subtle signals began to appear. Chinese research institutions were not just improving, they were becoming strategically focused. Progress in certain fields accelerated faster than expected. Development cycles shortened. Familiar research paths appeared thousands of miles away, adapted to different goals. Still, this did not look like a threat. Yet. Inside American universities, pressure continued to rise. Funding grew more competitive. Publishing became more aggressive. Careers depended on speed and output. International collaboration was not just beneficial, it was often necessary to survive. No one paused to ask what this system was optimizing for anymore. It was not optimizing for national advantage. It was optimizing for productivity. And productivity does not care who benefits next. The system did not notice the shift because it was not designed to notice it. American universities were built to measure success through publications, citations, grants, and rankings. None of those metrics ask a simple question: who benefits from this knowledge 10 years later? Inside academia, intent mattered more than outcome. If research was open, peer-reviewed, and legally shared, it was considered a success. The destination of that knowledge was irrelevant. In fact, asking about destinations was often seen as a betrayal of academic values. This cultural resistance mattered. When concerns began to surface, they did not come from professors. They came from outside the university system, from companies, from engineers, from people whose job depended not on publishing papers but on staying competitive. By the late 2000s, certain American firms began to notice a pattern that felt unsettling. Former students, once trained in US laboratories, returned to China and entered state-backed research institutions or rapidly growing private firms. Within a few years, those institutions were producing results that mirrored the structure of American research programs. Not copied, not plagiarized, but uncannily familiar. The same sequencing of experiments, the same prioritization of problems, the same ability to avoid paths that usually waste years. What was transferring was not innovation itself, but the map of how to reach it. And maps are more valuable than destinations. At first, executives struggled to articulate the problem. There was no stolen patent, no leaked document, no clear legal violation. There was only a growing sense that the United States was losing its natural lead time. That lead time had always been America's real advantage. Not that it invented everything first, but that it learned how to invent faster than anyone else. Now that advantage was shrinking. Meanwhile, inside China, the returning talent encountered a very different system, one that did not value openness for its own sake, but direction. Research priorities were aligned with national goals. Funding flowed towards specific outcomes. Redundancy was tolerated if it accelerated results. American-trained researchers found themselves in environments where the methods they learned could be applied without the same constraints. Failure could be absorbed at scale. Risk could be distributed across institutions. The result was acceleration. This was not accidental. China did not simply absorb knowledge, it reorganized it. American academic culture taught people how to explore. Chinese industrial policy taught them where to apply that exploration. The combination was powerful. Back in the United States, the academic system continued to run on momentum. Federal agencies funded open research because that was how breakthroughs had always happened. Universities expanded international programs because that was how rankings improved. No single actor had the authority or the incentive to slow the process down. And slowing down felt dangerous, because the moment openness is restricted, innovation risks stagnation. That fear was deeply ingrained. American universities remembered the Cold War, when openness had allowed the United States to outperform closed systems. They believed the same logic still applied, but the world had changed. By the early 2010s, the geopolitical environment was no longer unipolar. China was not a passive participant in the global system. It was a strategic competitor with long-term goals. That realization did not come all at once. It arrived in fragments. A report here, a warning there, a sudden leap in Chinese capabilities in areas that were supposed to take longer. Artificial intelligence, advanced materials, energy storage. In each case, the pattern repeated. The foundational research looked familiar. The application moved faster than expected. Still, the university system resisted alarm. Research is global, administrators argued. Knowledge belongs to humanity. Science cannot be nationalized without destroying itself. Those statements were not wrong. They were incomplete. Because science does not exist in a vacuum. It exists inside political systems, economic systems, and strategic systems. Pretending otherwise does not make those systems disappear. As concern grew in Washington, the response was uneven. Lawmakers lacked the technical depth to regulate academic research intelligently. Security agencies lacked the cultural fluency to work inside universities without causing backlash. Universities, caught in the middle, reacted defensively. They argued that scrutiny would drive talent away. That suspicion would poison collaboration. That fear would undermine creativity. And they were right. But so were the critics, because the cost of doing nothing was also rising. By the mid-2000s, Chinese research output was no longer just growing. It was converging with American output in quality, not just quantity. In some subfields, it surpassed it. The narrative of permanent American lead began to crack. That is when the tone truly shifted. Funding agencies started attaching conditions. Universities were asked to disclose foreign ties. Collaborations were reviewed through a national security lens. Background checks became more common. The effect was immediate and uncomfortable. Researchers felt watched. Students felt targeted. Administrators felt trapped. Chinese American scientists, many of whom had spent their entire careers in the United States, found themselves under suspicion simply because of their background. Careers stalled, trust eroded, and yet, despite the disruption, the underlying dilemma remained unresolved. Because the core issue was never about loyalty, it was about incentives. The American academic system was still optimized for speed, openness, and scale. None of those values disappeared just because geopolitics changed. Universities were still rewarded for growth, professors were still rewarded for output. Collaboration was still the fastest path to success, and knowledge once shared still could not be recalled. The question no longer was whether this system created competitors. It clearly did. The question was whether the United States could redesign the system without destroying the source of its strength, and that question had no easy answer. At this stage, the debate inside the United States became deeply polarized. One side argued that openness was non-negotiable, that the moment American universities began to think like border checkpoints, they would lose what made them exceptional. Innovation, they warned, does not survive behind walls. The other side saw a different risk, that a system built for a cooperative world was now operating inside a competitive one, that refusing to adapt was not principled but naive. Both sides were right, and that was the problem, because the United States was confronting a paradox it had never fully faced before. The very system that made it dominant was now helping to erode that dominance, and there was no obvious way to separate the benefits from the costs. Universities attempted partial fixes, disclosure requirements were expanded, certain partnerships were reviewed more closely, sensitive research areas were quietly reclassified, but these measures were reactive, not structural. They treated symptoms, not causes. The deeper issue lay in how knowledge itself was valued. In American academia, knowledge is treated as a public good. Its worth is measured by how widely it spreads. In strategic competition, knowledge is treated as leverage. Its worth is measured by who controls its application. These two logics are fundamentally incompatible. As this tension intensified, another quiet shift took place. Some American researchers began self-censoring, not because they were ordered to, but because uncertainty breeds caution. Collaboration slowed, risk-taking declined. Ironically, this hesitation threatened to damage the very innovation pipeline the United States was trying to protect. Meanwhile, China continued refining its approach. It did not attempt to replicate American universities exactly. It selectively absorbed what worked and discarded what did not. Openness at the front end, direction at the back end. American-trained researchers returning to China brought with them more than technical expertise. They brought an understanding of how to navigate complex research ecosystems, how to build teams, how to secure funding, how to translate abstract ideas into deployable systems. That translation step mattered most, because innovation does not end at discovery, it ends at deployment. This is where structural differences became decisive. In the United States, universities and industry are connected, but often loosely. In China, that connection is tighter, more intentional, and more aligned with state priorities. Knowledge flowed into systems designed to act on it quickly. By the late 2000s, the effects were impossible to ignore. Chinese firms were no longer just competing on cost, they were competing on capability. Entire industries began to feel pressure. Telecommunications, energy, advanced manufacturing. The conversation in Washington shifted again, from curiosity to concern to urgency. But urgency does not automatically produce clarity. Proposals ranged from extreme restriction to total acceptance of competition as inevitable. Some argued for tightening visas, others warned that doing so would accelerate decline. Some called for reclassifying entire fields of research. Others pointed out that innovation does not respect neat boundaries. What became clear was this: there was no single policy lever that could solve the problem, because the problem was not technical, it was philosophical. Was the purpose of American universities to advance global knowledge, regardless of who benefits, or was it to advance national power, even if that meant limiting openness? For decades, the United States never had to choose. Those two goals aligned naturally. Now they did not, and choosing meant accepting loss. Lose openness and innovation slows. Lose openness and talent goes elsewhere. Lose control and competitors accelerate. Lose control and strategic advantage erodes. This trade-off sits at the heart of the modern American dilemma. The most uncomfortable realization is not that China learned from the United States. That was always expected. The uncomfortable realization is that the United States never decided how much learning was too much. There was no line, no threshold, no moment of pause. The system assumed that leadership was permanent. History rarely rewards that assumption. Today, American universities still stand at the center of global research. They still attract extraordinary talent. They still produce breakthroughs that shape the future. But they now operate in a world that is watching more carefully. A world where knowledge is not just discovery, but strategy. A world where openness has consequences. The question is no longer whether the United States should remain open. That question misses the point. The real question is whether it can redesign openness for a competitive era, whether it can build systems that preserve creativity without exporting advantage indiscriminately, whether it can protect its future without betraying its past. Because knowledge once shared cannot be taken back. And the decisions made inside classrooms and laboratories today will shape power balances decades from now. The story unfolding is not about what was stolen, it is about what was given, and whether the United States still understands the cost of giving it away.